Well, hello, everybody. Pastor Steve here. Thank you, as always, for being with me for today's devotion. We are in chapter 39 of the book of Exodus, and I imagine for a few of you, this was not one of the more exciting chapters to read, talking about in detail the clothing that the priest, and in particular, the high priest wore, and the making of those vestments, those clothing for the high priest, and so on. And some of you may be wondering, well, Steve, why did you have us read this chapter? One, it's in the Bible, therefore we should read it. And I think there's value for us to read it and just know what it was like for them. So that's why we read it. Let me say that when you calculate all of this, the robe, the vestments, all of the stuff that the high priest in particular wore in the tabernacle was very expensive, very elaborate, very ornate, very formal, had a lot of symbolism in its design. And so it raises the question, how should clergy dress? What should a pastor, preacher wear, especially on Sundays? There's a lot of different opinions about this, different approaches, preferences, traditions, expectations. Some of it is even regional or denominational. Some, for instance, the Catholics and others wear very formal vestments during worship services, and there's a lot of symbolism connected with those vestments, and it's the idea that it's a sacred calling, so dress in a very sacred way. There's a lot of tradition and reverence associated with all of that. But it's sometimes said they do that so that it can help people focus not on the individual, but on worship of God. I will say that the formal vestments can have the unintended consequence of creating, and maybe for some people actually intended, creating a sense of separation between clergy and laity. And as Baptists, we've always resisted that. We believe in the priesthood of all believers, and something that draws too much distinction between a clergy person and a lay person, we react to. That's just part of our tradition and history. The truth is, there is no biblical command for how preachers, pastors in churches are supposed to dress on Sunday. There's no biblical command that you have to wear robes or not wear a robe. That's basically dependent on philosophy, on tradition, on preferences, and so on. I will say that I think a pastor, for instance, wearing the most expensive suit, the most expensive watch, the most expensive shoes, and so on, can tend to draw attention to himself in the same way that formal vestments can draw attention to the clergy person and a distinction between them and the laity. I would also say that a young, hip pastor wearing skinny jeans and V-neck T-shirts with a lot of chains and $5,000 tennis shoes is doing something similar, drawing attention to himself a little too much. In the end, it's not about the pastor, the preacher drawing attention to himself. It's about It's not about being the best dressed, the hippest. It's not about dressing in a way that puts you above and beyond and distinct from the people. In Exodus 39, verse 43, when they had finished making all the clothing for the priest and the high priest, Moses examined all the work, looked at everything they did, and behold, they had done it just as the Lord had commanded. This they had done, and so Moses blessed them. So God had made it clear to Moses how he wanted these vestments to be made that the priest and the high priest in Judaism, was to wear. That was to look and be made. They did that. This was a commandment to the Hebrew people, to the high priest of Israel. It's not a commandment for us. It's a commandment for Aaron, for the high priest, and the high priest who would follow him, the priest who would follow him in Judaism. It's not a commandment for us. what does the New Testament teach about this question of how you're supposed to dress on Sunday as a pastor, so on? Well, the truth is, it doesn't. Jesus did not. Nothing. Doesn't say we're to dress formally, wear vestments. Doesn't say we're to dress casually, informally. There's no biblical mandate at all in the New Testament for how Christian preachers are supposed to dress. There are some principles in Jesus' teaching, principles in the New Testament that apply to all of us, not just preachers, but everybody, especially at church. One is, don't lord yourself over others. Don't give preferential treatment to the rich. That speaks to how we dressed. You know, don't dress in such a way that you're drawing all the attention to yourself. That would be contrary to that. Don't favor the rich or the best dressed. A New Testament principle, a teaching of Jesus, is to be a servant, not a lord. I mean, he washed the disciples' feet. He was dressed in everyday clothing and washed their feet. A New Testament principle of Jesus' teaching is that the heart, our motivation, matters. Our attitude matters. I think it's a New Testament principle, biblical principle actually, that modesty matters. I think it's important, and Scripture teaches this. Paul talks about it in Corinthians and other places about being culturally sensitive, being culturally aware. So whether someone prefers formal or informal, okay. The real issue is, don't make it about yourself. Don't make it about you. And don't make your preference a biblical mandate. That's what the Pharisees did. They took the biblical teaching in the Old Testament and added all these rules to it. They took the commandments of the Old Testament and added this list of do's and don'ts as their way of obeying those. And then they made those rules, they created equal to what the Scripture actually says. And all of us, if we're not careful, can be tempted to do that. I mean, the old argument, give God your best, meant you had to wear a three-piece suit on Sunday. What are you doing? You're taking your application of a principle of being dedicated to God and making it a rule that you want to enforce as law, as Bible. Don't make the Bible say what it doesn't say. And don't make your preference a biblical command. Your preference is just that, a preference. Has value, but it's just a preference. It's not a command. It's not Scripture. Don't put your preferences on others as biblical commands. So, not really a devotional thought other than you just follow Jesus. Follow Jesus. And as a preacher, as a teacher, as a person who loves Jesus and shows up at church at Sunday, don't make it about you. Just trying to draw attention to yourself. And you can do that being casual and informal, and you can do that being very formal. Don't make it about yourself. For me, that's the big mistake. Well, I'll see you tomorrow as we wrap up the book of Exodus, the last chapter. We'll look at chapter 40. God bless you, everybody. I'll see you then.